Yes. This is policy. It was initially referred to as policy DKA. It has been revised to be called DKR based on guidance from the Georgia School Board Association, since we're breaking new ground. This is the policy that relates to the disposition of funds from the aftercare program, and at the invitation of the superintendent, we had drafted a policy to address what was some misunderstandings and concerns, so that it was memorialized rather than just a practice. And so this policy would establish that the 10% allocation to the district, the 90% allocation back to schools, and would invest in the Office of Finance oversight of those funds or their designee to ensure that there were proper accounting procedures, proper procedures for maintaining funds and segregation of funds. It does provide for some options for local schools, but it's still subject to the oversight of the Finance Office. I guess I formally move for it. It was introduced at our last meeting, so I am now formally moving for its adoption.
We'll get a second. A second by Mr. McMahon. Is there any discussion? Mr. Campbell?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Orson, oversight on my part, business. Is there a current procedure in place now that the schools are following?
There's, I think, a variety of procedures. There's a district aftercare office that has some responsibilities for administration, maintenance of the program, but there hasn't been a formal policy in terms of the funds. There's been this practice, and this is intended to address that specific issue and to ensure proper accounting procedures. We haven't addressed, and this isn't addressing the overall management or programmatic aspects of the after-school program, because I think that's really something for the administration as an administrative matter to make decisions on that.
The only reason I asked the question is I asked if Dr. Bell and his team has had a chance to go in and take a look at this. Is this something that maybe we're doing the work of staff, making a recommendation that his team has not had an opportunity to take a look at the procedure?
Campbell, we haven't examined the recommended procedures specifically. We are aware of what is in place relative to the after-school extended daycare program right now. The policy guidelines that have been in place since about 2007, 2008, there is a requirement that periodically the internal audit office will do an audit of the program. I think it's been a number of years since that has taken place. But there are historic audits in the file relative to the allocation of funds in the program. Yes, sir.
Mr. Bill, I asked you when I listened to the policy, I read through it just briefly before coming into this session. It talks about a $5,000 disbursement amount. Would you, as CFO of the district, I don't know if you can answer the question now, but would you, as CFO of the district, be okay with us setting the threshold at $5,000 for approval at the local level? You have an opinion on it?
I don't have an opinion right now, no, sir. I have to take a look at the language.
I think that's consistent, though, with current policies, that there's a and it's consistent with state policy, quite frankly, for some dispersals. But 49, there are lots of invoices that come through at 4999 throughout the state of Georgia.
Dr. Carter and then Mr. Mayfield. Okay, Mr. Mayfield.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Orson, I guess I have several questions, and hopefully won't get too lengthy here. I want to go through and look at the provisions that I'm concerned about, and my concern is, my question to you would be, how flexible are you in modifying the language, if you will? My overarching concern is whether or not we have an opportunity to be less prescriptive in order to provide the administration the flexibility that it needs on an ongoing basis. And so to that point, I wanted to understand whether or not the provisions that would give the local school the flexibility to use the internal system versus or a banking system, external banking system. In your opinion, would that pose any potential risks in terms of oversight for those funds?
Well, I think it relates in generally to the management of funds at the school level. I mean, there is a dichotomy in lots of things. There are some school level funds that are controlled already. You know, I'm not absolutely wedded to saying that they have to be able to have the option of keeping it in a local bank. This was really about having this comport with general management of the school system. So I believe schools in various capacities, whether directly as a school or through their foundations, have local control and oversight of their funds. It wouldn't remove any of the oversight in their internal audit part, but certainly I would be open to a friendly amendment if your thought was that perhaps they should all reside at the school system as long as the ability to use them. I think that's the more important part of the provision, which is to be able to use them either in furtherance of the program or their academic program to take out what has been, I think, a sore point among schools. And so that we'd really be vesting financial oversight in the finance office in a way to ensure accountability.
And the second concern, I guess, okay, I appreciate that. And the second concern or question that I have actually have to do with paragraphs 4 through 9, and that is whether or not, I'm going to go back to 3, whether or not this should be specific to aftercare versus any program at a certain dollar threshold, if you will, any program that the school manages. In other words, should this policy be focused on any program that the school is operating, as opposed to having a separate policy for this particular program?
Well, I think this is a unique scenario in terms particularly about the amount of money in the schools. It's a discretionary program. I think if we saw in the future that there were other programs that could utilize this model, we could choose to either extend this policy to those programs or to create a parallel policy. But as we know from earlier in the year, there was some consternation because there, quite frankly, just such a large dollar amount, and there were a set of expectations that I think everybody is in agreement about in terms of the disposition of those funds. But as the superintendent pointed out, there was no policy memorializing that. And so, you know, this is driven in the first instance by addressing this specific scenario. But certainly, I think in the future, if we found other substantial programs that warranted equal treatment, it would be relatively easy to either amend this policy, because we've now created a new descriptor code, which I think would lend itself, and it's different than the student activity funds, which is why we looked for a different descriptor code, or we could create another policy that was DKS, whatever we called it. But I think for the moment, this is the issue that sits on the table. It continues, as we know, it continues to sit on the issue. It came up in our budget hearing last week, and I think it behooves us to at least get this issue and to provide a framework, to your point, if there are future issues of similar nature.
And then final question, whether or not you know, or whether or not either the superintendent or someone in the administration could advise us as to whether or not items 5 through 9 are actually a part of existing administrative practices that wouldn't require additional policies to be set around this particular.
I don't have a draft right in front of me because it wasn't in my packet, so if you'll just read 5 through 9.
5 as an example, school personnel shall have itemized receipts for cash purchase. Other purchases shall be supported by purchase orders or contracts.
Yeah, this comes out of existing policies. I copied most of that from another policy. So if there's not procedures in place, then they weren't in place already, but this was consistent with existing policy in other areas.
Right, and that was my concern, was
Right.
whether or not it was necessary to have these provisions in this particular policy if there are prevailing administrative practices that already govern them.
The only reason I put it in is because I saw it in another school board level policy, and so I wanted to avoid the construction where people didn't think they had to do it because it wasn't in there. So it might be redundant because I believe it's in policy DK, which is school activity funds, and I didn't want somebody to think, well, since they didn't include it in DKR, we're not responsible. So it's a little bootstrapping, but better to be safe than sorry.
Thank you.
Dr. Carter?
Thank you so much, Marshall, for answering Thad's question. That certainly helped with a few that I had. I just have one remaining item that is of concern for me, and one that I think we need to have a conversation and perhaps staff input on. In the second paragraph, in item number 2, the remaining proceeds, 10% shall be remitted to DeKalb County School District to finance, 90% shall be retained by the local school, and giving the local school the choice to elect to have the Office of Finance maintain or for us to do it. I'm a little concerned about how we do that, whether that's something that's appropriate for each and every school to determine, and how we address the audit process, the reporting process, and the accountability. Not problematic with the split, not problematic with the schools being able to choose how they spend their 90%, but concerned about those funds staying in the local schoolhouse.
Right, so that was, I think, Mr. Mayfield's question. And so I think there's two levels. One, we do have funds that reside at the school level already, but that particular issue, I'm perfectly okay accepting a friendly amendment that would simply have it coded at the system if that creates some discomfort with board members. So I think we could easily amend this by just saying they would reside and taking out that local banking option.
That helps. And then to complete, I guess, my thoughts about this particular proposal, I'm interested in us actually having Dr. Bell's office's feedback to us. Did we get that already in terms of the difference between what we're saying is policy and what they have to do as procedure? Did we sort that all out?
Well, I think the issue was really that we've been getting from Dr. Bell's office has been about the amount of money, because there was some ambiguity about, there was an overall figure of 5.8. Dr. Bell provided clarity that about 2.7 is actually the district share, because obviously local schools have been expending some of their share. So if you strictly put 10%, it would be 580,000, but that wouldn't be an accurate representation. But otherwise, we'd have to, there should be within our system anyway, an accounting for, we're dealing with substantial amounts of money. And the thought behind this is because it's really finance driven and for accountability and oversight, that it more properly resided where the expertise was, which was for this component in the finance office. So I was trying to be mindful of, I think, what would be likely concerns about management and oversight of these amounts of money.
Doctor, I'm sorry.
My last thought, Mr. Chair, I promise you. I promise you it's my last thought. With that in mind, knowing the spirit of this policy, I think that it's something that we need to move forward. But I am very much interested in having the superintendents and his staff to respond.
Dr. Marley?
I'm agreeing, and Marshall, I know that you put a lot into this, but I'm agreeing with Mr. Campbell. It seems as if a lot that was done here probably should have been done through the superintendent and the administration and through Dr. Bell. I'm concerned about going down paths where we have the board actually doing its research and putting together the information and then coming back and voting on it. I think we're going to have to be very careful of that. I think that most certainly, again, going back through the superintendent, when we have concerns like this and putting it back to the superintendent for the superintendent to then, in fact, give it back to the people that need to go through this and then giving it to us so that we can look at it, we can have feedback, and we can also assess it ourselves. But I think that we have to be careful, because if not, we're going to go through some of the same paths and some of down the same tracks that we're going down before. So I just want to say, in line with what Mr. Campbell was saying, that if Dr. Bell and his staff and the superintendent have not had an integral part in what's going on in this whole policy being put together, I think that we might want to look at it and have them to give that feedback and look at it again, rather than us coming up with it and then voting on it too.
Well, it's been out for 30 days. It was created at the invitation of the superintendent. I'm a little, I have to say, a little confused here, because this was drawn out of earlier meetings we had where the superintendent rightfully pointed out that there was not a policy. And so his concern, which I completely understand, is that we've sort of been operating in the shadows in a lot of things in which there have been practices, maybe widely understood practices, but not policies. And if you may recall that the superintendent invited us to draft a policy to convert that practice into policy. So this is simply a manifestation of that invitation, and that this draft has resided out there for a month, or if there were concerns about the actual policy. So, we have a fiduciary duty and financial oversight of the system, and we are responsible. We're a policy-making board. And so, we simply took up the superintendent on his invitation to clarify what had not been clear within policy.
And not the policy, but most certainly with Dr. Bell and the staff and everyone else being able to have an understanding of all of it before that we actually got to this point, but not the policy itself.
Well, they've had the same period of time everybody else has, so I trust that Dr. Bell and his staff, because they know and we've had an ongoing conversation, they've understood the practice, and Dr. Bell is a very, very experienced financial manager, so I have faith in his ability and his staff's ability.
Mr. Orson, would you be amenable, just because we had 30 days, doesn't mean that we should vote on something if there's not a good understanding of what we're voting on. So I hear there's some anxiety in that regard. There's some anxiety as to whether or not the administration has had the time to review it to determine the validity of the agenda item itself. So would you be amenable to tabling it until we can have the administration to review it and we all come back with a formal recommendation?
Not adverse to that. I guess I'd like to hear, and I know that Mr. Thurman is going to ask Dr. Bell, because I want to make sure I'm understanding what the nature of this uncertainty is.
I'll defer first to Dr. Bell, then I'll come back.
Mr. Bell.
Honestly, this is the first time we've seen the flow of funds in item number 1 and number 2 described in this level of detail. And my staff is here, and we're not sure. We think maybe 1 and 2 are a change as to how we're accounting for the funds now. Number 1 says, from the proceeds, the direct expenses of the program shall be paid first. And then it says, of the remaining proceeds, you have a 10%, 90% division. I think the way we're accounting for it now is, of the proceeds, we have a 10%, 90% division. And then of the 90%, the program expenses come out of that. So I would very much like to hold off on this and talk to Dr. Cynthia Hill about it and compare it to the details of the program that we have in place now to see if this is a substantial change. Additionally, there's a statement further down where it says the expenditure of the funds collected cannot occur until the academic year following the receipt of such funds. We just want to see if that fits in terms of what's written already. Then you have this thing about the CFO's office has got to approve everything, any expenditure of $5,000 or more. That would be done in accordance with purchasing policies. We'd like to compare what's written here to the purchasing policies. So I would request that we hold this for a cycle so we get a chance to take a look at it in the detail that it's written out.
And that would be fine. And then I appreciate that, and that clarity certainly would help. And I would, I did want to address the 3 about the requirement, that at least what I wrote in there for the year after, was simply to ensure that funds were on hand for payment of program expenses. As you know, people can get out over their skis, and we have seen some negative balances in certain school-level programs, which indicates to me that people were paying for other things before they were paying their program expenses. So, as I think Mr. Mayfield would appreciate, I want to make sure we're paying what we're supposed to be paying before they're using the money for anything else. So given you want to get the clarification on that, I'm very open if we can agree that we would just put this back on the August agenda, and that hopefully and in the interim, we'd get whatever clarification and modification is needed to ensure that you're comfortable with how this is written.
Mr. Super.
And I want to state for the record, I support the spirit of the policy, and the administration, I believe, supports it. And our task, and ask Dr. Bell and his staff to really look at it so it can be ready for the August meeting so that it can be voted upon. We have no problems with the spirit of the policy.
Fair enough.
Point
Mr.
of clarification, really quickly. When we table a board policy like this, I know we have to give 30 days notice on a new policy. Is there a threshold for how substantial a change we can make to the policies before another 30 days? So we can vote on this at the next meeting?
That's my understanding.
Even if they're a reasonably substantial change? Is that right?
My understanding, and our parliamentarian is here. Okay.
We could keep just the title, and essentially, yeah.
Mr. McMahon.
Yes, Superintendent, I've seen the numbers. Have the schools been notified regarding their fund balances, or are we still going through accounting issues, or just give me the update on?
I had to defer to Dr. Bell and his
Sure,
chair.
thank you.
No action.
Yes, sir. The schools are notified through the after-school administrative offices as to what their balances are.
And they match the ones that we've received?
Yes.
So, that's all I need. Thank you.
Mr.
Follow-up question for you, Dr. Bell. Last week, we as a board agreed that the $2.6 million, whatever that amount is, be put in the general fund, and the remaining amount will stay in with the schools in a designated account. Special revenue. Thank you very much.
Dr. Bell,
I'm sorry. Yes, sir. That's what y'all voted on, and we have made that transfer of funds and rebalanced the consolidated budget sheet, which I think I handed out this afternoon in the work session.
Thank you. With that in mind, the notification to the schools will be that residual amount, not total 5.8.
That's correct. We've taken the 2,488 over into the general fund for use in 14.
Can I ask one other question then? Because which relates to those negative fund balances, what the remediation is for those schools that have a negative balance, that were permitted to expend more than they actually took in.
Like I say, the administrative officers of the program will work with those schools to overcome those negative amounts. Now, in relation to the total information that was transmitted of about 6 million, I want to say, there was some, $20, $30, $50,000 negative amounts. It's not like you have a big negative 2 or 3 million.
Understood.
Okay?
Right.
And I was informed that those negative accruals result from some programs that had some community service elements that didn't cover their own costs. But I will talk relative to how those, through time, will be corrected.
Thank you.
At this time, I call for a motion to table this amendment to the bylaws and policies.
And actually, I guess postpone it to the proper procedure to postpone it to our August meeting. We're going to do it to a specific date, then we can anticipate that parliamentarian here.
You're probably right. You could probably do what you just said as well.
Right. If we know we're going to bring it up in August, I think we want to postpone it to the August meeting. Is the
Either way,
formal motion?
somebody should make a motion.
Okay. That's my motion. To postpone it to the August. Postpone consideration of this item to the August board meeting.
It's been moved and second.
Right.
Wait a minute. It's been moved and
Yeah,
second. It's
I
been
will.
moved by Mr. Orson, second by Mr. McMahon, that it be.
Yeah, we're just postponing consideration. of the
That
item
it be
until August
postponed
meeting.
until next month. Is there any discussion? Now we can discuss it.
That postponement is based upon response from Dr. Bell.
Right.
If they don't get back to us by board meeting,
Well, then I guess we postpone it again.
I'll
But,
just check.
right. But hopefully, they'll be able to get back to us.
Yes, sir.
No further discussion. If no further discussion, all in favor, let me know by show of hands. It's postponed by a vote of 7-2, I believe.
I must abstain.
Oh, one abstention and one, okay.